Hi, welcome back. In the last video, we talked about output label. In this video, we will talk about input text and its various attributes. Input text renders an HTML input field of the type text. The ID attribute is used to give an unique ID. Required attribute makes it mandatory to provide a value during runtime. Required message attribute is used to display a message when the required field is not given during runtime. Size and max length attributes behave the same way as they do in HTML. The rendered attribute makes the input text invisible if the value of the rendered attribute is false. It makes it visible if the value of the rendered attribute is true. The title attribute shows a tooltip text message. We will not discuss about other attributes at this point of time. We have already used the ID attribute while using output labels for attribute. But then we'll go back and see how this works again. Here it is. We have used the ID attribute here. So just have a look at this. ID is equal to user ID. We have given the name user ID, and we are linking that with the output label with the for attribute of the output label. So one way of using the ID attribute is by giving a for the label for which it is being used. Now let's run this. There's nothing that you can see on the screen. See? So it works like this, but then I told you that it should be unique. Okay, let's try giving the same ID to another input text and run this. So you can see that there is an error. It says component ID so and so user ID has already been found in the view. So it should be unique. It's something we should know when we are using user ID attribute, and it is always a good practice to give ID. Now let's discuss about required attribute and required message attribute. So we have this user ID, let it be there. Now I'll put here, when you say it is required, you're going to put required true, right? I'll run this and let's see what we can see on the screen. So when you press the login button, that's when it tries to submit. So when you say click on the login, you are going to see the message validation error value is required. So it is also giving the user ID, that is the ID that we have given to the input text. So the input text is user ID, which there is a validation error. and it says value is required. Now instead of this particular message value is required, we want something else to be displayed. Let's say we want to display it as user ID is mandatory. So what we can do is use the required message attribute and say user ID is mandatory, right? Run this. Now say login without giving anything. Says user ID is mandatory. Okay. So required says that this particular input text is required for, and required message gives the message that you would like to provide when the required field is not filled, right? Now let's have a look at size and max length attributes. For the input text called as user ID, we have used a size of 15 and max length of 15. Let's run this as it is and then see how it works. So you can see that it is accepting keyring 10, 15. It's accepting a maximum of 15 characters. Okay, let's go back here and then see. Let's increase max length to 20. And run this. See that there is no change in the appearance, but then let's see how many characters it accepts. 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. Yeah, accepts 20 characters. That is because you said max length is 20. If you look at this size of this input text, it has not changed. So max length doesn't change the size of the field on the screen. It would make it accept more number of characters if you increase the max length size. Now let's go back to the code and then say okay, let me also increase the size of this input text to 20. So now it is size of 20 and max length of 20. Let's see whether we see any change. Here it is, has increased the size. So size refers to the size on the screen. Max length refers to the number of characters, the maximum number of characters that the input text can take. 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. So it works the same way as it does in HTML. Now let's have a look at the rendered attribute. It works the same way as it does for output label. If the rendered attribute is true, the input text is shown on the screen. If it is false, it is not shown on the screen. Let's try that out. Now, by default, it is true. So let's run it as it is and then see how it works. So it is shown on the screen. Let's go back to the XHTML and change this one to rendered false. So if you see the user ID input text field is not visible anymore. It doesn't make sense if only the label is shown and not the input text. So let's also make the output label invisible by putting it as rendered false. Now you can see that both the label and the input text are not visible. So rendered attribute makes a component visible or invisible based on it being true or false. Now let's discuss about title attribute. Title attribute provides a tooltip text. Tooltip texts are used to provide information on the field that we are hovering over. So let's try this out on this particular input text. Say title. Let's say that this input text user ID can either be an email ID or an employee ID. So I'll say provide email ID or employee ID, right? So I'm saying maximum length of 100. Let me run this. So if I hover over this, you'll see provide email ID or employee ID. So this would be useful to the user as to what is the information that he has to fill in over here. So right, so title is used to provide a tooltip text. So let's summarize as to what we did in this video. We learned that input text renders an HTML input field of type text. We used the ID attribute and learned that it should be unique. We learned as to how to use the required attribute and required message attribute. We learned as to how to use size and max length attributes. We learned as to how to use rendered attribute. We learned as to how to use title attribute. We will discuss other attributes of input text at a later stage. Bye for now.